War is a candle snuffed out by the light. War is a shadow, antithesis of light, casting its pall upon innocent souls, dishonoring those who nobly stand in defense of sovereignty. War is an unsolvable equation between the powers that ain't and the powers that be. War is an eagle, talons drawn, piercing eye, heart of stone. In its wake, carcasses are strewn from sea to shining sea. War is the unmitigated gall that churns in the belly, often waging war to gain peace, a paradox of many that can live at ease and can afford to send others to fight for them, dying for liberties yet unseen. If there is no peace in the world, how can there be peace in me? If there is no peace in the world, how can there be peace in me? I can't find no peace. I can't see no peace. Can't make no peace. Drugs don't bring peace. Making love don't even bring peace. Money don't make peace, and war surely does not bring peace. If there is no peace in the world, how can there be peace in me? Stomach churning, fires burning, bullets flying, words and anxiety rising, planes flying, carrying people prepared for dying. How can this peace come? Peace eludes the evidence, and it illuminates the pretense that this is less about defense than it is a need for control. If there is no peace in the world, how can there be peace in me? In all my questioning, the answer lied dormant, unable to surface in the torment of my own thoughts. Worried, tense, and distraught, silence befell me. There, it came to me. I held up a mirror to review my inner sanctity, and I discovered that there was no peace in the world because there was no peace in me. There was no peace in the world because there was no peace in me. It's my pleasure to stand here before you tonight and to challenge us. I wish I came with a bag of answers. I come with more questions and thoughts than I do solutions, but I know that it comes from us gathering together and joining together in one mind and one heart. I'm thankful to Pacem and Terris, not only for inviting me here for tonight for this discussion, but for the rich work that we have engaged in over the past year. Their community, their structure of leadership is challenging the norms from the very beginning. As bad as folk can talk about women, can you imagine 4 women being leaders together? You either have a headache that pops in your mind when you think about it, or you embrace the power of what that can be. And that is what I get to observe. And that is what we are here to explore. What does it take for us to look past whatever we call normal, whatever we call standard, that we can open up our ears and begin to hear things from a different perspective and a different time? In our world today, not only are we struggling for our own personal peace, we've got Ukraine. We've got the current war in Israel. In the continent of Africa, they have reported more coups in the last 2 to 3 years than they've had in the last 50, where people are rising up and taking over for what they would describe as unethical governments. And they often do it at the risk of creating militaristic rule, but it still seems like it's better than what they think they have right now. And let us not forget our own country, where we are warring amongst ourselves in terms of just how we lead our country. And if you look at a lot of the modern television shows that deal with gangs, I often say we are modeling at the, sometimes if we're professional, we think that when we war, it's not the same as the war on the streets. But when we tear people down, when we destroy character, when we destroy the fabric of what we believe in, that's war. That's a war that cuts deep. And so the question becomes, what are we to do about it? What are we to do to acknowledge it? I was driving up from Dover today, and this car cut me off. And I would never do it, but in my brain, I was trying to think of what can I do to get that car back? Most of us are carrying a little war on the inside of us. And it is often nurtured. Sometimes I catch myself when I'm watching shows and I want to say, kill him. Pull up, girl, pull up. Because we can't be entertained by the very thing that we want to see changed. We can be educated by it. We can learn by it. So one of the things that I've been watching, I just finished watching Top Boy. Has anybody heard of that movie? It's from England. And it's very similar. If you haven't seen that, you may have seen, I just wrote down the name of it, Snowfall. Did anybody see Snowfall? I forgot to tell you, I'm kind of an interactive speaker, so I'm going to talk to you a lot while I'm talking today. Is that okay? Yeah. In both of these shows, they're similar to The Wire, if you've seen them, Scarface, Godfather, any of them. It's always some story between these factions of people that in most of the through line in these are trying to achieve something through nefarious ways. But they always have these rules that they operate under. And there's a book that I just learned about that begins to summarize that, and it's called Long Way Down. And in this book, there is a young man who is preparing to get vengeance because someone has killed his brother. And they use an allegory of him traveling down an elevator. And at every level that he gets on the elevator, a ghost gets onto the elevator. And the ghost is someone in this cycle of violence. The person who killed the person who killed his brother, or the person who his brother killed, they all get on. And he talks about 3 rules. And the rules are, when something bad happens, don't cry. Don't grieve. The second is, don't snitch. Don't tell. And the last is get revenge. If someone kills someone in my family, then I gotta kill them. And then you know what happens after that. Then somebody in that person's family has to come after me. And all of this was so that they could create this wonderful world that they desire to live in. But pretty soon they find themselves trapped in these rules. On the shows, you'll see someone that violated their loyalty, and they're unable to forgive them, even if they want to, because it would violate the rule. And in his story, all of these ghosts are trying to get him to understand you don't have to live by that rule. But we often live by it at some level in our own lives. When something happens in our lives, how often do we give ourselves the space to feel and to deal? Because feeling and dealing are necessary if you're ever going to get to healing. We don't tell. We either don't tell what we have already deemed as an enemy because we don't think that enemy is going to look out for us, or we don't tell because we've been taught what goes on here stays here. Whether that stays here is in your house, in your community, or in our nation, because we still stand as the proud police officers of the world where we got our own stuff that we need to handle inside. And so one of the quotes that is in the book, it says, in case you ain't know, gunshots make everybody deaf and blind, especially when they make somebody dead. It's hard to face the level of violence that we see occurring throughout the world. It's easier to look the other way. It's easier to numb our hearts to it. It's easier to say, that's not me. But I've been hearing a saying going around that you keep saying it's not you, and eventually it's gonna be you, or someone that you love. And though I'm using one of the harshest forms of violence, which is gun violence, let it not be mistaken that I'm talking about word violence, because our words are bullets. Let it not be mistaken that I'm talking about systemic violence, because those acts destroy lives. They destroy individuals, they destroy communities, and we've got to take a look at it. There's a woman, Fania Davis. She actually is the sister of Angela Davis. And Angela Davis has quite an interesting history. She grew up, I believe both of her parents were professors, so she grew up in a very educated household, always very much an activist household. And if you ever hear her talk, you can tell that her life is forever traumatized by her acts of seeking justice. She feared for her life. It wasn't just a general, I'm getting a bunch of letters. She literally feared for her life. And while she chose her movement in one way, her sister moved a lot in the realm of restorative justice and restorative practice. And so she has a book, it's called The Little Book of Restorative Practice. And I'm gonna tell you, if you go out and look at the restorative practice of the little books, just get ready, because they're not expensive, but because they're not expensive, you wanna have all of them, because there's more than one little book. There's a little book of circles, the little book of healing, so there's a lot of them, good sources of knowledge. But one of the things she talks about is the internal battle between the warrior and the healer. Because a lot of times when we are dealing with social injustice, we put on our armor, right? We're going out, we're gonna fight this injustice, and you have to. And it's a part of it. It's not gonna change all the lessons we have learned, that power does not concede unless it's by power. People don't typically get up and give you a seat at the table. You gotta usually do something to slide your chair in at the table. But she also speaks about the fact that it can't be divorced from the need to bring healing, because restorative justice can't take place in the absence of healing, because that healing allows you to release what needs to be released so that you can rebuild community and that you can rebuild relationship. And that is a part of the hard work, because it can be difficult. We talk about it a lot for those that work in healing professions, that when you're in the midst of a major social uprising, there's a part of you that wants to be on the front lines and be ready to fight and be ready to picket, to do whatever is going on, but you can't take that same spirit into the room to try to help somebody release what they're carrying. Healers often have to be, if you think of almost any faith tradition where there is a healer, that person is usually set apart. And they're set apart so that they can let go of all of those things and that they can bring you their purest self. Well, that becomes quite a challenge when you have your feet set in everyday life and you want to be about provoking a change, but you still want to be able to manifest healing. And so that is a struggle that we have to learn strategies for how to navigate that space. When we need to recognize that we have become such a warrior that we are no longer in connection with our peace. And my faith tradition, which is Christianity, that shares a common thread with Judaism, we know that there's a story of David wanting to build a temple for God. But God told him, you got too much blood on your hands. You can't do it. He was the warrior. He had to leave the building of that work to his son, who was the peacemaker. We don't often get to create that dichotomy. We are often challenged to travel through that land of doing both. And we kind of create the illusion that it's impossible to do both. If I would ask you to raise your hand, how many of you would acknowledge that you feel that tug in yourselves from time to time, whether you're going to stand as the warrior or whether you're going to stand as the healer? And it can be overwhelming to navigate it. And sometimes I know that my response to being overwhelming, my fight, flight, or freeze, I can go to fight, but a lot of times I go to freeze. When I get stuck in that, I freeze. And so we have to begin to figure out how to navigate that space. And it's important, I hear a lot about restorative action being used in the schools, but a lot of times what I hear alongside of it is that there's not the relationship building that is necessary for restorative justice to work. And so I'm using a phrase, and I won't assume that everybody knows the phrase, but restorative means to restore. It means to restore what? Relationship and connection. And it's done by, if you do wrong to your community, then there is something that you have to do to make amends for the wrong that you have done. But once you make amends, or even while you are making amends, we make it clear that you are still a part of me. You know how if you chastise your child, you give them tea for the fever. My mom, she was an eye cutter. All she had to do was cut her eye, and then she would turn around and want to know if you want some ice cream or something. And I'm still getting over the eye cut, and I'm like, I'm not ready for any ice cream yet. But her point was, I addressed the wrong, but you are still my child, and I still love you. And we do it all the time. We have friends that get on our last nerves, and we have whatever our interaction is with them, but then we make room for them again. What does it take for us to develop a society where we hold people accountable for the ways that they bring injury, but we never let them go?